One of the great things about the Christian intellectual tradition, and there is a powerful Christian intellectual tradition, often, by the way, and sadly ignored by pastors, not very often taught in the churches, not even to young people. And yet this intellectual tradition is important in addressing and in some cases answering questions that occur to the thoughtful Christian. So here's a question to think about. If God is omnipotent, all-powerful, and omniscient, God knows everything, then God obviously knows the future. God knows, for example, what you would do tomorrow. God knows if you're going to commit a sin tomorrow, for instance. And yet if God knows the future, God knows what you're going to do, how can you possibly have any freedom in doing it? If God knows that you're going to commit a sin, you're going to commit a sin. That is a fact. Because God knows for sure. God isn't guessing. God knows what you're going to do. And since he knows what you're going to do, how can you possibly have the choice of whether to do it? And to take the argument even further, if God knows everything, then he knows what everybody is going to do in the future. And he has always known it. And that means that nobody has any free choice, because how could God know in advance what people are going to do, what everybody is going to do, what all choices are going to be made? If God does know those things, how can people in fact have real freedom to make those choices or to reject those choices? It would seem that they don't. Well, this is the very problem, this is the very conundrum taken up in one of the Christian classics. It's written by a man named Boethius, and it's called The Consolation of Philosophy. Now, seems like a very strange sort of Christian text, because when you first read it, it makes no references to Christianity at all. It instead appeals to classical knowledge and classical learning. It references Plato and Platonic ideas, but no mention of the Bible, no mention of Jesus. The guy who wrote it, Boethius, was a very high official in the post-Roman Empire. And when I say the post-Roman Empire, the Roman Empire collapsed when the barbarians invaded Rome, and a pagan emperor named Theodoric was the ruler. And Boethius was one of his top officials, but he kind of fell afoul of Theodoric, and he was slammed into prison. And it was in prison, awaiting execution, that Boethius composes this Consolation of Philosophy. Now, this is a book full of sparkling insights on a lot of topics. One of the topics that Boethius raises at the very beginning is he's lamenting his fortune. And he goes, oh, this is terrible. I was kind of on top of the world, and look at me now. Why would fortune do this to me? How can fortune be like that? And then Lady Philosophy, who's the person that Boethius is talking to in the story, in the work. Lady Philosophy says, Boethius, how dumb can you be? It's the nature of fortune to be this way. Fortune is fickle. Fortune is like a person spinning a wheel. And so in condemning fortune for being fickle, you're condemning fortune for doing what fortune naturally does. So if you accepted all the benefits of fortune before, wow, you're on top of the world, fortune put you up there, that's because your wheel was at the top, now your wheel is at the bottom. So the wise man recognizes that your fate, if you will, is to a large degree in the hands of this kind of whimsical. And then Boethius goes on to discuss, if that is the case, if you've got this kind of wheel of fortune, is it not, what about God? Isn't there a providence that governs the universe over and above the wheel of fortune? So anyway, the book goes into all this stuff and has very interesting things to say about fate, about chance, about providence. But what Boethius is most famous for is addressing, and I would say resolving, the problem of divine foreknowledge and its seeming incompatibility with free will. So let's state the argument kind of clearly. What God foreknows, what God knows in advance, must be the case. That's point number one. Point number two, what must be the case is not subject to free will. It's going to happen anyway. And since God foreknows all our future actions, he knows in advance what we are going to do, therefore it follows that we are not free in any respect to do any of it. This is the problem. And Boethius spells out the implications of the problem. He says, listen, if this is true, if we don't have free will, then you can't blame someone for doing something bad because they didn't have a choice in the matter. You can't praise someone for doing something good. In fact, you can't even call it good or bad because ultimately the person is simply acting by necessity. Now, before Boethius, the church father Augustine had tried to address this problem and addressed it in a kind of an ingenious way in which Augustine made the point that just because God knows in advance what you are going to do doesn't mean that God is making you do it. You can know in advance something while not influencing the action. I know Debbie pretty well, and so, for example, if I know that she's going to be given a choice tomorrow of eating, let's just say, pizza or Chinese food, knowing her, I know she's going to pick pizza. She hates Chinese food. So I know that, but I'm not making her decide that way. My foreknowledge doesn't cause Debbie to go one way or the other. I simply happen to know. So this was Augustine's solution to the problem, but Boethius takes the solution deeper, and I think in a more profound direction. Basically, what Boethius argues is that God doesn't have foreknowledge in the sense that we humans mean. What Boethius is saying is that foreknowledge implies that God is embedded in time. Think about it. The whole concept of foreknowledge, the word fore comes from before. So you are in time and you know now what is going to happen, let us say, tomorrow. But Boethius says that God is eternal, and what eternal means is not just that God sort of lives forever, that God lives in the extension of time, but rather that God is outside of time. And therefore, Boethius makes a kind of startling observation. He says, if someone is outside of time, then the future to them is like how we would consider the present. God doesn't have foreknowledge, he just has knowledge. And if God just has knowledge of something, then there is no incompatibility between present knowledge and free will. Let's say, for example, I'm standing on my balcony and I'm observing a car, and I can see that the car is turning right. So I have knowledge of what the car is doing. But am I interfering with the free will of the driver in turning right? No, he's making the decision to turn right. I merely am able to observe it, I know it, at the exact moment that he's doing it. So in this way, by, in a sense, presenting a new and deeper idea of eternity, God is being not a prisoner of time, but someone who inhabits, you may say, is outside of time. God lives in what Boethius calls the eternal present, the eternal present. And therefore, says Boethius, God perceives everything simultaneously. For God, there is no past, there is no present, there is no future. I'm quoting Boethius. Eternity is the whole and perfect possession of unlimited life at once. And in this way, this becomes then a very powerful idea, not just in resolving the apparent conflict between free will and divine omnipotence, but in offering an understanding of eternity that persists through the Middle Ages all the way to the present.